Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, the Propel Student Work Placement Program Info Session. This webinar will be presented by Joe Baker, Director of Tourism HR Canada, and Rachel George, Project Manager with Tourism HR Canada. I'm your host, Dan McDonald, Sales and Marketing Development Associate with Baxter Media, and today is Wednesday, March 23rd. So just before we get into things, I'd like to let our viewers know that at the tail end of this webinar, you'll have the chance to ask questions, and some were submitted to us in advance. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to type them into the Q&A section of the public chat box, which is towards the right-hand side of your screen, and those questions will be answered in due time. And please be sure to attend the full duration of today's webinar, and remember that this is a live session, so your patience is appreciated during any technical difficulties that might arise. I will now hand things over to Joe Baker, Director of Tourism HR Canada. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to this group, and welcome everybody. As Dan mentioned, Propel, the Student Work Placement Program, is a product of Tourism HR Canada. And in case you don't know who we are, Tourism HR Canada is a pan-Canadian organization with a mandate aimed at building a world-leading, dynamic, resilient tourism workforce, which, of course, now is as important as it's ever been in our history. The Propel Student Work Placement Program is a federally funded program to support wage subsidies for post-secondary students on work-integrated learning experiences in the hospitality and tourism industry. And that's what we're here today to speak to you about. We will get into all the details of Propel, how you can apply for wage subsidies, how you can access wage subsidies, how you can connect with students. But before we get into that, I do want to hand it over to my colleague, Rachel George, also from the Tourism HR Canada team, to say a few words of welcome, state a brief land acknowledgement, and then take us through the agenda before we dive right into the details. Rachel, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe and Dan, and thank you everyone for joining us today and for having us. It's really great to have this opportunity to share the program with you. Before I start us off with an overview of our agenda today, I would like to start us off with a land acknowledgement. While this event is virtual, we would like to acknowledge that across Canada, we are meeting on lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous peoples from the beginning. Tourism HR Canada acknowledges that our office is on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. Tourism HR Canada recognizes the Algonquins as the customary keepers and defenders of the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. We honor their long history of welcoming many nations to this beautiful territory and uphold and uplift the voice and values of our host nation. We invite all attendees to join us in meaningfully and thoughtfully acknowledging the oppression of lands, cultures, and the original peoples in what we now know as Canada, and to consider how we can each move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Our presentation today on the Propel Student Work Placement Program will basically be a high-level introduction to this program. We'll start off in a minute with a 2-minute video clip on Propel. And after that, I will be handing over to Joe, who will lead us in an introduction on how you would, as a student, employer, or post-secondary institution, participate in this program, as well as some information about what is work-integrated learning. Next, I will describe to you a very brief overview with screenshots to show you a preview of how employers can use this Propel online platform to post work-integrated learning opportunities and apply for the wage subsidy application before handing it over back to Joe again, who will run through our last bit of this presentation, covering the eligibility criteria. And of course, as Dan has introduced at the beginning, there will be a time for questions at the end, during which we would be happy to answer any questions you've got or provide extra clarification. We will also have our contact information and Propel webpage address up on the slides towards the end if you wanted to reach out to us directly after today or find out more information. And with that, without a further ado, let's go ahead to the video. Thanks, Dan.
Student Work Placement Program is a new initiative to help the tourism and hospitality sector recover from the devastating impacts of the pandemic. It is powered by Tourism HR Canada and funded by the Government of Canada. Propel creates a direct link between post-secondary students who are looking to enhance their workplace skills through work-integrated learning opportunities and employers who can provide valuable experience while also showcasing a multitude of career pathways in the industry. Students will get paid hands-on learning and mentoring with special consideration for underrepresented groups, and they will have opportunities to develop the work-ready skills required to secure meaningful employment in the tourism and hospitality sector upon graduation. Employers will acquire much-needed early talent interested in working in the industry and will be provided with a wage subsidy of up to $7,500 for each student hired through the program. Post-secondary institutions will be the bridge, complementing existing work-integrated learning programming and connecting students with hundreds of workplace opportunities across Canada. Propel is open to domestic students enrolled at recognized post-secondary institutions and registered Canadian businesses, startups, and not-for-profits related to the tourism and hospitality sector. There has never been a better time to explore work-integrated learning, and there has never been a greater need for new talent. Apply now for fall, winter, and summer semesters. Visit propelcareers.ca to get started today.
Great. Hopefully that was helpful for everybody. Perfect. All right, so as you'll see in the presentation, what we're trying to do is give you a summary of some pretty complex and nuanced issues. What we've tried to do when we've built this deck is you'll see right now at the bottom, there are links to more information. That happens a lot through this presentation. So we will make sure that you can access all of that other content that helps you really get further into what we're specifically talking about. So as mentioned, this is the Student Work Placement Program, and this is about our federal government funding work integrated learning. So you may be asking yourself right now, I sort of have an idea of what work integrated learning is, but what does it really mean? I'm not going to read this description in too much detail, but to say that Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Canada, CWIL as they're called, is the lead organization for advancing work integrated learning in Canada. And work integrated learning essentially requires three pieces. It requires an academic institution that believes that a lot of the student learning can happen in industry. It requires a student who is actively engaged in a program that is connected to an industry sector. And then it requires an employer partner who is willing to be a part of the learning experience of the student, where the learning that happens on the job ultimately complements the academic study. That is work integrated learning. The concept of work integrated learning has been around for a very long time. You think about the apprenticeship system. Just think about the way people have learned always by learning from somebody else, by learning from somebody who's an expert. All of those different things are aspects of work integrated learning. Work integrated learning as a term, as a framework, is something that we've developed over the last few years, just as a mechanism to help people understand how important work integrated learning is, and especially if you are an employer, how you can engage in the learning process of the student, because ultimately we believe that the first step here is a work integrated learning experience with you in the workplace. And the second step, assuming that it works for everybody, is that you then hire those students when they graduate, and they are an early talent pipeline, which is exactly what Propel is here to do. We are here to support early talent strategies for Canada's tourism and hospitality industry. So there are technically 9 different kinds of work integrated learning. They aren't particularly relevant to our industry, though you can certainly dive deep in there and find out more information about them. We have tried to summarize it down to about 4 that are probably most common for you as an employer when you have students coming into your workplace. Cooperative education, or co-op, is probably the most common type of work integrated learning. And certainly as we help you navigate through our portal where you're posting opportunities and where you're applying for wage subsidies, we would suggest that you are constantly kind of circling around that cooperative education space. Generally speaking, cooperative education is a long period of time, probably the length of a semester, which is anywhere from 14 to 16 weeks. So those are the kind of really healthy, robust placements that are great for the student to learn on the job, but also great for you as an employer to give yourself lots of time with that student to be in your workplace. You may also see terms like field placement, internships, work experience. It doesn't matter too much in terms of the specific definition of each of those, but we're just trying to help you familiarize yourself with different types of work integrated learning. So again, student work placement program, just a little bit of context. The student work placement program, that's the name of the program that the federal government uses. This is specifically coming from Employment and Social Development Canada. Some version of the student work placement program has been around for a long time. I'd say as long as about 10 years. But prior to the pandemic, it was ultimately a resource issued to priority sectors. And that's just a technical government term for sectors that they deem a priority for economic development across this country. So perhaps as a response to the pandemic, but certainly as a trigger point for us at Tourism HR Canada, we thought it was a really compelling time to propose to the government that the tourism industry become a priority sector so that this wage subsidy can be available to our employers during some of the most challenging years in our history. And so the year that we just completed, being that we are sort of in a fiscal year that ends in March 31st, was the first year the tourism industry has ever had access to the student work placement program. So we are very excited, and we will talk about what that means. We can also say that we are working very close with our government partners to announce the second year of funding, which means that we will have funding available for the next 3 semesters of academic programming in the spring-summer semester, which we know is really important for the tourism industry, also the fall semester, and then the winter semester. There are 3 terms, essentially, that students are out in the field in work integrated learning, and the summer is one of them. So we're really excited to share some detail with you to see if we can help you access wage subsidies for the immediate spring-summer season that's ahead of us. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Rachel to take us through a couple of, oh, sorry, never mind. I still have a few more things to say. So that being said, we named this program Propel. So you'll see the name Propel. Propel is Tourism HR Canada's iteration of the federally funded student work placement program. So there are 3 key stakeholders, as I mentioned: the post-secondary institutions, the students themselves, and the employers. And there are a few key takeaways for each of our stakeholder groups. If you happen to be a post-secondary institution and you're watching right now, there are 3 things we ask of you. Share Propel information with your students, direct them to our portal, and direct your partners and your employers to these wage subsidies. We know that this is a really big country, a really diverse country with all kinds of different colleges and universities, and each one of those institutions has a really unique relationship with their local industry partners. So we don't need this all to come together in one place. Our job is to make sure that we are distributing resources and wage subsidies across the country through our post-secondary institution partners. If you happen to be a student or you are working with a student right now, there are 3 things we ask. We ask that students go into the portal and apply for a work integrated learning opportunity. We do ask, and as one of the eligibility criteria that we will review in this webinar, that students provide proof of enrollment and proof that they are in a program with a will component. And then, of course, we are constantly encouraging those students to complete their placement, see it all the way through. Now, we're hoping today that most of you who are in attendance are employers, businesses, industry. In this program, you are an employer. There are 3 things that we ask from you, and we'll take you through that in a lot of detail. We want you to post a work integrated learning opportunity as if it's a job, and the Propel portal is very much like a job board. Post a work integrated learning opportunity. Apply for a wage subsidy, and then hire a student. So when we are asking you to go in and post an opportunity, we aren't going to tell you which student is best for that opportunity. Again, very much like a job board, they are going to apply for it. So once you've posted the opportunity, once you've applied through a wage subsidy from us, the rest is up to that student and you as an employer, which again, as you heard from the things that we were talking about, that's why there are 3 key stakeholder groups here: post-secondary institutions, the students, and the employers. But the individuals and the organizations who receive the wage subsidy financing are you, the industry employers. We don't pay directly to the post-secondary institutions, and we don't pay directly to the students. We pay directly to you. And this is one of those very unique funding programs where we receive funding from the government to distribute to our industry. So we are highly motivated to help you succeed. Our measure of success is how much of the funding we've received from the federal government we can get out to our industry partners so that we can go back and apply for more, because we know that this funding helps our industry sustainably develop that early talent at a time that is more important than ever in our history. I think now it's time for me to hand over to my colleague Rachel, who's going to take you through the Propel online portal, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Joe, for that very excellent run through the introduction of this program. Just in case anyone hasn't noticed yet, but on the side in your chat, I have provided a copy of the links that speaks to some of the information that Joe has provided you today. There's a link for work integrated learning if you'd like to learn more about what that is and those different components or types of work integrated learning that Joe spoke to, as well as a link to ESDC's webpage on the Student Work Placement Program. And now, as I introduce us to this online portal, I'm just sending a link also to this portal if you want to access it later. But basically, this online portal, the portal system is called Outcome Campus Connect, and it was developed by Magnet and Orbis in partnership. And it's essentially a place where employers can do 2 things. You can either go on here, so you would create an account and sign in or log in. And then once you're in there, you can there's essentially 3 options. There's 1, you can post a work integrated learning opportunity to advertise and hire those students, or you can just go straight in there to apply for the wage subsidy application. Or if you just really want to save some time, you want to do this in one sitting, you can just do them at the same time, so one after another. And that's essentially what you can do. I'm just going to move us to the next slide. Okay. So for employers, the overall process, like really condensed version of what it looks like is like this. You would post the opportunity, the work integrated learning opportunity. You would apply for the wage subsidy for that particular opportunity. And if you haven't already hired a student, you would then hire a student. And what I'm now going to show you in the next few slides is basically a brief overview of what the process looks like for both posting a work integrated learning opportunity, as well as what it would look like when you're applying for the wage subsidy. Starting off with an employer posting a work integrated learning opportunity, you will see, I'm only going to be showing you a few select slides, which I think will be most beneficial for some of the questions we get. And it'll show you what it'll look like or what to expect. It might seem overwhelming when we try to describe it to you, but hopefully these screenshots will show you how simple it generally is, and the pages of the form is designed to make it as streamlined as possible for you. To start off with, you will be asked what type of opportunity you're recruiting for. And as Joe described earlier, there are different types of work integrated learning. And we would encourage you to, if you don't already have awareness of what exactly work integrated learning component you are for the student you're hiring, you can select co-op, and as that will target a majority of number of the students available out there and opportunities. And then you would get the opportunity to select a target field or area of study. And what this means is there are students available from different programs, and while we don't require you to hire a student from the tourism and hospitality programs, we do encourage it, and we hope you are able to hire students from those programs. But because as businesses, you've got a variety of processes, you've got different disciplines and positions available, you could be hiring a student from another program, because essentially the main requirement here to be eligible is that the business or the employer, in your cases, we're hoping that a number of you are from the tourism and hospitality industry. And so if the student's placement is in that property or that business or company, then they would be eligible. And then, just moving over to the next slide. Next, you would just you can keep this broad, but you can now target it by geographical location. So if you would like to target specific schools in a city or a province, or you just want to keep it broad and keep it open to all provinces and cities across Canada, you can use the toggle and features here on this step to make your selections. After that, you can then just tell us, or sorry, not tell us. At this point, you're telling the person or the school, the school or the student, what this opportunity is about. So here you would say what the wages are, the length of the placement, the description of the job, and then you would also say a little bit about yourself as your organization, who the main contact is, how you would prefer they apply for this position, whether it be by email and so on. There's essentially two options. You can ask them to apply by email or direct them to your company webpage if you'd rather they apply through that area, and so on. It's pretty straightforward with these two steps. And then one of the key steps you would be doing when you are posting this work integrated learning opportunity is towards the end, just before you're ready to submit, you will be asked to just confirm which student work placement program you are applying for. And in this case, we would ask that you select Tourism HR Canada, just so you're connecting your opportunity with our program. On this screenshot, you can see some information there about being eligible for up to $7,500. We will talk a little bit about that amount, specifically around some new criteria that our funders have issued out starting April 1st, and we'll talk about that later on in the presentation. So next, we're going to talk about the process very briefly for an employer to apply for the wage subsidy. So if you've already posted or posted an opportunity somewhere else, you've already hired or recruited a student, and you just want to apply for a wage subsidy, you don't have to go on the system to post the opportunity using our portal. It is available to you if you would like to, but if you're ready to submit an application, this is also something you can do. You can just come straight onto the portal, create an account, register, and go straight to the application. And this is essentially what you would run through. You go on the Propel portal, you submit the wage subsidy application, and approved applicants will receive a signed employer agreement. We'll be reviewing your application to double check that it covers everything that's required by our funders, the criteria they've set. And after that, once the placement's been completed, you are free to come in and update the application, and I'll show you in a minute what that means. And also, once the placement is completed, we would encourage you to support invoices and some other supporting documents so that we can then double check everything's in order, that we've got all the proof or documents or letters we need as stated by the funders, and process the payment. And I will also pause here to say that all of this information, the steps to post a work integrated learning opportunity or to run through the wage subsidy application, which I'll be showing you in the next few slides, as well as information on what supporting documents to provide. This can be very overwhelming, but don't worry, we've got this. we've got resources designed for you. Either like we've got a video clip that runs through the whole process step by step to show you what to do, or if you'd prefer, that we also have a PDF version of these instructions with step-by-step instructions and screenshots. So don't worry about not being able to remember all these steps or this information. Those resources are available on our Propel webpage, and a link to that will be at the end of this presentation. So just coming back to that, to continue the part I mentioned about applying for a wage subsidy, one of the starting things you'll be asked for is just to confirm what placement term this is for, and then talk a little bit about yourself as the organization that's employing the student, as well as the placement type. And then you will be asked to provide us information on the student you've hired. Now, this is what I mentioned before, where there will be times where you might need to come back and update your application. And this is an example of that. If you are an employer who is coming in, you just want to get the ball rolling, you want to get this application out of the way, and you haven't yet hired a student, you can leave this step. You can skip it. You can leave that toggle there that's I've sort of shown with a red circle on the screenshot, where you can leave that position as not filled and just click next and move on. When you do hire a student, we would just ask you to reach out to our email or our team, and we would unlock your application. That way you can go in and update it whenever it's convenient for you. And that's an easy way to do it if you're not ready for this step. Next, another optional step is if you've got supporting documents that we've asked for, you'd like to submit, you can. But again, this is something you can skip until later if you like. And with that, that pretty much wraps up the two things that an employer can do on our Propel portal. Again, the link is in the chat, but it will be in our Propel webpage. And you can do both things on the Propel portal, and there is additional information we can cover later on. But I'll hand over now back to Joe.
Thank you, Rachel. And everybody watching, we recognize that we're covering a lot of ground here, and there's a lot of detail. As Rachel mentioned, we've developed a lot of aids, be it videos that promote the program, but also videos, tutorials that help guide you through the application processes, and all kinds of other resources. We'll share our website at the end so you have it, propelcareers.ca. You will find everything that we're talking about here on that website, and there's lots more information. So we're sorry that we're sharing as much information as we can, but we respect your time and we want to deliver as much value as we possibly can in this information session. So I just wanted to support all of the comprehensive detail that Rachel just shared in terms of the qualifications, in terms of the eligibility criteria. As you've heard us mention several times, this is a program that's funded by the federal government. As you can appreciate, when you receive federal government funding, there are a lot of accountability measures, which we all as active Canadians hope that happens so that our money and our taxes and our investments are taken care of wisely. So these eligibility criteria and much of the process is guided by the ESDC, which is why we shared some of those links at the beginning of the presentation. So we'll share the eligibility criteria. They are not amendable, so this is what we have for the moment. So from a student perspective, who qualifies? Well, the first one, and maybe one of the more challenging of the criteria, is that this is a program that is available to domestic students only. We find this particularly challenging because we recognize the number of international students enrolled in Canada's post-secondary institutions, and we also understand how important that group is, how much they've sacrificed to be here, how important they are to our future, and how vital they are to our industry. Unfortunately, we don't influence and we don't control the eligibility criteria. For the moment, domestic students are the only ones who are eligible. You can be assured that we have elevated our beliefs and our opinions about that to the decision makers within the government. But for the moment, this is a program that is only available for students who are domestic students, Canadian permanent residents, or citizens. They do have to be registered in a recognized Canadian post-secondary institution in a program that includes a work placement. Essentially, that is also a list that's governed by the ESDC. They are mostly the colleges and the universities across the country and the Cégep system in Quebec. This really isn't a program that is specifically for private career colleges, although there are some exceptions, and those details can be found on the ESTC website. But for the most part, if there's a college or a university or a cégep in your region, these students are eligible. We'll talk about this in a minute, but one note that Rachel made that I think is really important here just to reflect on is, this is a wage subsidy program that is available for Canada's hospitality and tourism industry. Mostly that means you as an employer, but we recognize that each hospitality and tourism business across this country is just that. It's a business. So you don't have to hire only hospitality and tourism students for work integrated learning experience. You could search for engineering students. You could search for information technology students or marketing students or HR students or any of the kind of background that you need. So when you're going through this portal, just recognize that you can definitely access students in programs of any study across this country. What matters most is that you yourself are a hospitality and tourism industry employer, and we'll talk about that eligibility criteria. And just finally on the student note, a program needs to have a formal component of work integrated learning. This is not a wage subsidy program to hire summer students or students on part-time jobs. This is a wage subsidy specifically targeted at students who are enrolled in programs that have some component of work integrated learning. You heard the terminology from us: co-op, internship, field placement, work experience. That's the kind of component of the program that students need to have. The students will know whether they have a component of work integrated learning in their program, because so many of them already do. Thousands and thousands of students are already in this system looking for places to do their work integrated learning. So this is not something that we have to specifically roll out to the academic institutions or the students. They're already doing this. This is just wage subsidies that support the hospitality and tourism industry to be in a position to take on students for work integrated learning and to receive some funding at this really important time. So who qualifies from an employer perspective? We hope mostly that's you. Tourism and hospitality employers, which means your business is in the hospitality and tourism industry, which is also pretty broad. Accommodations, food service, travel services, transportation, recreation, entertainment, or specifically a job function that is happening within an organization that has a tourism and hospitality scope, but the organization may not be a tourism and hospitality employers. You know, maybe you are a law firm, and within your law firm, you have a small catering department. If you're going to be hiring a catering coordinator in your law firm, that is still technically a hospitality and tourism job, even though you are not part of the hospitality and tourism industry. So that all is part of the application process, but that's how this program is designed. Recognizing that we rolled out this program in the middle of the pandemic, let's hope things are getting better. Some of these placements can be completely on-site. Some could be remote, certainly if the nature of the work is remote, or they could be hybrid. So any of those work functions are funded. There is a no stacking type of policy that the government imposes here, which essentially means for any funding you receive for an individual student on a work integrated learning placement, you can't then be receiving another source of federal funding for that specific student. Your business itself can be receiving different kind of funding sources, but it's all about the wages that you are paying to that student while they're on work integrated learning. Those wages cannot be offset by other government funding sources other than the student work placement program. And then the student must be hired as an employer of the company, not as an independent contractor. So again, we know that we just covered a lot of ground. All of this information will be made available to you. 2 key contact points. One is our email address, propel@tourismhr.ca. We have a team of people monitoring that email and working with our employer partners and our academic institutions. So if you have a question after this, feel free to send us an email. That's the best way to get in touch with us. And as I mentioned before, our website, which is propelcareers.ca. And with that, I think we will bring Dan and Rachel back in and see if we can answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you, Rachel. And one of the submitted questions, Rachel answered by text already. So Sandy was asking if the slide deck can be shared with everyone afterwards. Yeah, definitely, Sandy. So when we send the webinar recording to everyone tomorrow, and that'll be going out to you guys in the early afternoon tomorrow, we can include the slides as an attachment to that email. So yeah, that's definitely, we can provide that for you guys tomorrow afternoon. And yeah, let's dive into some of the questions, some of them which were submitted in advance. So let's see. One of the submitted questions was, are the students' work availability limited to the summer terms? For example, I would need a student to work from April 15th or May 1st all the way to October 15th.
So I will answer that question in a short way. So no, you don't have to worry about the student just being available for the summer. Like we said, they do need to be on a formal work integrated learning placement. So I'm hoping that the person asking this question has a relationship with the post-secondary institution that has a co-op term that begins in May and ends in October. Some of them do. But if the student is enrolled in a program and that program's placement ends, let's say May, and then ends at the end of August, technically speaking, if you continue to employ them beyond their formal work integrated learning term, the time that extends beyond that work integrated learning term is not covered. But the funding is very flexible. And what's important to note is, even if you find yourself halfway through a semester, so generally speaking, the semesters start May, September, January. That's not everywhere, but that's usually how it is. If you find yourself in a position where maybe it's July and you realize you've got somebody on your payroll who is a student, a domestic student enrolled in a post-secondary program, and you know that you're eligible for this work integrated learning subsidy, you can also apply retroactively. So don't worry about when it stops, when it starts. Lots of resources through the portal and lots of ways for us to help you get access to those wage subsidies.
Amazing. Thanks, Joe. And Irene is asking, on the slide I saw, it didn't reflect the option of a full-time position. Is this all part-time, summer, or practicum type positions?
So again, when you're going through the Propel portal and you're posting the opportunity, you will be able to identify what kind of opportunity it is. Practicum is certainly a part of the work integrated learning space. Work experience can be, if that's prescribed by the academic institution. But again, if it's a summer job for the student and that summer job is not a formal component of the program, then that's not eligible. So when you're going in and posting an opportunity, you do have a chance to click all of the different concepts that relate to your posting. And those are the things that make your posting eligible for this wage subsidy. So again, I know that that's a little bit nuanced, but if it's just a straight up summer job or any job, this funding doesn't make you eligible, or you aren't eligible for this funding. But if it's any component of work integrated learning as a part of an academic program, then you are eligible for this wage subsidy.
That's very good to know. Thanks, Joe. And Simon's asking, can students bridge 2 terms?
So yes, students can bridge 2 terms. Yes, you as an employer can bridge 2 terms. In some cases, there are academic programs that have 2 consecutive terms of co-op placement, which essentially could be as many as, 30, 32 weeks of co-op. So you can definitely do that. In some cases, though, because the semesters are broken down, you yourself as an employer may need to apply for modified wage subsidies from one semester to another. And that's a nuanced detail that if you get to that place and you bump into some problems, you can always email our Propel at tourismhr.ca and get questions. But yes, the funding is flexible across semesters. Yes, students can be in one placement in multiple semesters, and there is no limit in terms of the number of students you can hire. So considering that you are getting funding for each individual, this is also a great time to maybe go in for a couple of more students. If you're going to go through the process, you may as well get a really good value out of this wage subsidy.
Amazing. Thank you. And Sarah's asking, are there caps on subsidies tied to the hotel revenue like CEWS was?
No, so it's per individual. So the only capacity, I suppose, is based on each individual. But again, as mentioned, you could hire 6, you could hire 1. You know, we have a couple of strategic partners, Accor, a big brand, Marriott, a big brand, and a more local brand out of Nova Scotia, just using hotels as examples. They may be hiring, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40. So there's no capacity in terms of how many you can apply for as an individual organization. And again, making best use of your time and resources. If you get into this system, we have found that the employers who are most successful accessing wage subsidies are those who have persisted and really figured out this system. And again, the only measures that are in place in this system are accountability measures from the government. So it's really, as long as you learn about the eligibility pieces and you're putting all those into your application, there's no legitimate reason why your application would be declined, unless Tourism HR Canada runs out of the cumulative wage subsidy funding that we receive from the federal government, in which case, what a great problem that will be to have. And that just gives us more ability to go back to them and say, our industry needs more support. So keep it up, keep going, keep persisting, just like everybody has over the last couple of challenging years.
Perfect. Thank you. And that segues right into the next question, which was, is there a maximum amount of funding an employer can receive or a maximum number of jobs an employer can advertise?
No. And a really good point. You know, the Propel portal, as I kind of mentioned, it's very much based on a job portal. So if you're going to go through the process of creating all of the different things that you need to create to make it work, you may as well post for a number of opportunities. Some of those opportunities may not even be work integrated learning. You can actually post jobs too in there. And we use this little distinction on our team. Any employer can go into the system and post a work integrated learning opportunity. You can also just go into the system and apply for a wage subsidy, or you can do both. And so I say it in this way. Perhaps you already have a relationship with a post-secondary institution, or somebody has just walked through your doors and they're really proactive and they're like, hi, I'm a student at my local community college or university. I have a co-op placement. I would really like to do it with you. You don't then have to go and duplicate the process of posting the job that you've already filled with that student. That's why within the portal, you can actually just apply for the wage subsidy. So if you've got something figured out on your own, or if you've already got like a corporate job board, you do not have to duplicate that effort. So just remember, within the Propel portal, you can post a work integrated learning opportunity, you can apply for a wage subsidy, or you can do both. So there's a lot of flexibility built into this.
That's awesome. Thanks, Joe. And Jordan says, we own an event management company. Can you advise on eligibility as with other funds we have applied for? We sometimes fall outside of what is typically considered tourism work, while the events increase tourism dollars in our destination. Can you advise on how this may look? Thank you.
Yes, great question. And we deal with this a lot. So yes, absolutely. The events industry is part of the tourism and hospitality industry. There will be plenty of opportunity as you are going through and applying for your wage subsidies to provide evidence that you are part of the tourism and hospitality industry. I would just say, as you kind of look at those eligibility criteria, it's all in the language and the way that you present to us justification for receiving that funding. We are certainly familiar with the visitor economy, and events are a strong driver of that, and we are very supportive of it. So, and hopeful and optimistic. There are a lot of students in Canada's post-secondary institutions specifically studying event management, and having spent lots of time myself as an academic administrator, I can tell you those programs live within the schools of hospitality and tourism across this country. So it's a really important part of our sector, part of our industry.
Nice. Thanks, Joe. And let's do a couple more that were submitted here, and then we'll get into some of the questions that were submitted in advance. Jim says, I'm on the website. As an employer, how do you sign up?
Perfect. So if you're on the website, propelcareers.ca, there's a link on there that will take you directly to the portal. And the portal looks like one of those images that Rachel pulled up. Maybe, Rach, do you want to click back a few to take us to the portal so it's a bit familiar? Perfect. Wow, there you go. Once you're in the portal, there you go. Perfect. Really, the first step is that you create a profile, right? So you're going in and you're saying, you know, here's my business. It's Joe's Bakery. This is where we're located. This is the number of employees we have. That's signing up. Signing up is going into the Propel portal and creating a profile. The entire system will prompt you for the information it needs to build that profile, to post that opportunity to apply for that wage subsidy. So once you're there, and maybe Rachel can put in the chat the link to the direct link to the portal. We don't really like the URL. It's pretty confusing, so don't try to memorize it. But if it gets in the chat right now, then you can just click right on there and it'll take you in there. And all of our communication with you is through this portal. So, you know, as this is really an adjudication system for us as well. You post your opportunity, you apply for a wage subsidy on the back end of the system. We go in there, we look at that wage subsidy. We may have a question for you. A lot of the communication goes through that portal. And if you've used Indeed or LinkedIn or any of those platforms, it's a very similar user experience.
That's great. And I see that Rachel has pasted that into the chat. So for anyone that wants to access that, that's just in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. So let's read out one more that was submitted to us through Q&A, and then we'll get into some of the questions that were sent to us in advance. Elish asks, can you just clarify, should we apply for the grant first or hire the student first? Just wondering what would happen if the funding wasn't approved, but the job offer was on the basis.
Great question. So it's hard to advise in a general sense because you should do whatever works for you. If you know that you have a pool of potential students already, then you should just apply for the wage subsidy. If you are going to post an opportunity because you need the portal to help you find the student, then that's what I was referencing. You can post the opportunity and apply for a wage subsidy at exactly the same time. There really isn't actually much more work to do to apply for the wage subsidy after you create the posting because you built a profile for your business. So the choice is yours. You can post an opportunity independently, you can apply for a wage subsidy independently, or you can do them both. It really depends on what's happening. Sometimes we've dealt with some employers who say, I've already got a really great relationship with my local, academic institution. I've already got 6 students. I know exactly who I want to hire. Yeah, just apply for the wage subsidy. But on the other hand, post the job, and if you're kind of trying to figure that out, post the job, and while you're waiting for those students to apply, you're also then waiting to determine whether your wage subsidy was approved. Ultimately, if you hire the student before you know if your wage subsidy is approved and your wage subsidy isn't approved, then essentially that means you don't have the funding. You would have to determine within your business if you had the capacity to continue to pay that student on a placement anyway. But that's why we say get in there as quickly as you can and do as many of those 3 steps as you possibly can.
Amazing. Thanks, Joe. And again, for everyone that might want to hear some of these answers again, when I send out the follow-up email to you guys tomorrow afternoon, the recording will include the entire Q&A session in the recording as well. So that'll be included in the video, and it'll be in the form of just a YouTube link. So some of the questions that were submitted to us in advance. Let's see. The first one was, are students actually using this platform to look for jobs?
Great question. So yes, so the backbone of the Propel online portal, as you can see, even at the bottom when you look at that, our URL, is an organization called Magnet. Magnet is actually a part of Ryerson University, and this specific product is run based on an Outcome Campus Connect platform. What that all means is before the student work placement program, the Magnet and Outcome Campus Connect platform were already active within academic institutions across this country. So yes, institutions and their students are already using this system to look for jobs, but they're also already using this system to look for work integrated learning, regardless of whether there's wage subsidy funding available or not. So it's already well populated. We kind of mentioned it's a bit of a nuance, but when you're posting your opportunity, make sure you click on Cooperative Education. cooperative education really gives you the biggest pool of potential students. Now, especially with health concerns kind of lowering optimistically and travel restrictions lowering, we are also seeing the return of students who are willing to be mobile as they pursue their work integrated learning opportunities. So while bringing a student in from your local geography makes a lot of sense, if you don't think that's possible, the system will allow you to promote that opportunity across the entire network, which means, who knows, maybe you're out in Prince Edward Island and there's somebody in Vancouver Island who really wants to come and do their placement with you. So that's definitely possible.
Great. Yeah, that's a very thorough answer. Thank you. And the next question was, is transportation provided for students to get to the destination and attend internship tasks?
So no, transportation is not. It wouldn't be provided in any iteration of work integrated learning, again, regardless of this funding. We have seen, though, some companies sort of willing to say, we will support travel and accommodation needs. How you would go about organizing that, again, is really an individual decision, but there are no specific wage subsidy or subsidy supports through the student work placement program for travel or accommodations at this time.
And next up was, can students work remotely?
Yes, students can work remotely as long as they meet all the eligibility criteria and as long as you as an employer meet all the eligibility criteria. Yes.
That's great. And do youth have to be returning to school to qualify, or can you be a recent graduate?
Great question. So if they are a recent graduate, then they are officially not registered in a post-secondary program, which means they would not be eligible for this wage subsidy. We do know, though, there are a lot of academic institutions that put their work integrated learning placement at the end of their program. So technically speaking, they could be starting their work integrated learning as their final semester, which means you get them all the way through to the end of their program, and then ideally they transition nicely into a full-time employee or into an employee within your organization.
Thank you so much. And next up was someone who was asking, we are looking for guest service agent, first cook for bistro, serving staff, maintenance person. Can you help with these types of roles?
Yes, 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 and yes. Those are all roles within the span of the student work placement program for the tourism and hospitality industry. Yes, yes, yes. And just to note again, because we kind of hear this language and it is on the portal and it is a touch misleading and we just want to be really specific. If you are trying to hire people for jobs, unfortunately, this wage subsidy won't do the trick. You are hiring people on work integrated learning experiences, which means that they are active students enrolled in programs. That means what they're doing with you is learning on the job, which requires a really solid training plan, somebody to oversee what they're doing and really help them learn and grow. These students are not the finished product. Potentially a university program that's 4 years, when a student comes out of a 4-year program, they're probably pretty well ready to start their career. Same with a 2-year college program and lots of nuance in between. But there are students in their first year of their academic studies who have a component of work integrated learning. They could be within the first, 12, 15, 18, 20 weeks of their educational career. So think about how unpolished they may be when they enter your workforce. But don't forget that diamonds used to be carbon.
Of course, of course. That's fantastic. Thanks, Joe. And well, this next question was partially answered already, but describe the type of work assignments in more detail. Specifically interested in what type of work qualifies for mentorship and applied projects.
Yeah, I mean, so that detail is ultimately up to you. I know that's a bit of a tricky way to frame it, but in terms of applied research, in terms of mentorship, that would be something that you would have to flesh out, ideally with your local academic institution to find the right fit and determine if there's a student out there who's eligible for that and who has that component of work integrated learning as part of their program. So it's kind of a tricky thing. We are a bit of an intermediary in that we make wage subsidies available to the tourism and hospitality industry. The ESDC sets those eligibility criteria. So when you are going in to apply for a wage subsidy, you are essentially describing to us what is happening with that student in your workplace, and for us then to assess that evaluation against eligibility criteria. So we did share links, CEWIL, Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Canada. There's lots of detail there in terms of what comprises the 9 various components of work integrated learning. And then the ESDC link, which was also on the slide referencing the student work placement program, gets more into detail in terms of the eligibility requirement. Don't be discouraged by the complexity of the eligibility pieces, because you only have to figure it out once. Once you figured it out, there's a big appetite for us to support you as best we can. If you come with an idea, with a concept that meets all the eligibility criteria, then really, in this case, anything within the scope of work integrated learning is possible.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And here's a kind of a multi-part question, but this is the last one that was submitted to us in advance. Does the student have to be hired as an employee for the placement, and what is the minimum hours of eligibility? We have a student that is joining us for a co-op with 420 hours. And do we have to post the job if we already have a qualified candidate?
Awesome questions. Okay, so can you break the first part of that question for me, Dan?
Yes, definitely. So it was, does the student have to be hired as an employee for the placement, and what is the minimum hours for eligibility?
Perfect. So legally speaking, the student needs to be hired as an employee. Even when the students are in your workplace on work integrated learning, they need to be hired as employees. So they're covered for WSIB and all of the other pieces that are necessary. The number of hours in order to be eligible for the Propel funding is, we have a minimum of 20 hours per week and a minimum of 4 weeks. Again, we recognize that work integrated learning is really nuanced and complex depending on your own situation. A co-op placement with 420 hours, that sounds really great. That's a lot of time. That's more than the minimum that we have. And so we are, a 420-hour co-op placement is also definitely eligible. But if it's less than 20 hours a week and less than 4 weeks, the Propel funding is likely not going to make sense, just because that probably can't be much of a meaningful work integrated learning experience with such a short amount of time.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense. And
other parts of that question that I didn't get, Dan?
Yeah, let's see, because next up they had asked, and do we have to post the job if we already have a qualified candidate? Awesome
question. So no, you do not have to post the job if you already have a qualified candidate. You can still use and access the same portal. Just apply for the wage subsidy. There's a part of this system when you go into, you set up your profile. Are you here to post a job? Are you here to apply for a wage subsidy? Or are you here to do both? Click on the wage subsidy, and then you just apply for it. Essentially what that does is that portal becomes a mechanism for the student and you to upload the proper documentation that we then need to evaluate their eligibility and submit that information to the ESDC for approval. There's a bit of a technical piece, but each student engaged in a work integrated learning experience funded by Propel has a student agreement. It covers all of those bases that they need to sign. And then each employer who receives wage subsidies from Tourism HR Canada has an employer agreement as well. That's all part of the process. That's what we are doing behind the scenes. You don't have to specifically worry about that going in, but just know that that will be the ultimate outcome. And those agreements just guide the parameters of the placement, the funding, and ensuring that everybody meets the eligibility criteria. And again, those are accountability measures put in place by the federal government to make sure that we are responsibly investing our dollars.
Right, of course. Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And here's a question that was direct message to me. Someone had asked, are there students located in Quebec who speak French?
Yes, absolutely. There are lots of students in Quebec speaking French who also are studying hospitality and tourism programs. And I did mention the CEGEP system. They are eligible for this wage subsidy as well. So when you go in, and Rachel mentioned it in her pieces, when you go in, you can actually specifically identify your geographical region. And once you do that, you can see the institutions that are in your region that offer those kinds of programs. We also, though this webinar or this information session has been delivered in English, we have a lot of French content on our website. We are a national organization, so we pride ourselves on providing communications and structure in both of our official languages. So there's lots of French content online as well. And if you needed something specific, you could always email us.
Even better. That's great. And Kirsten is asking, we are an American-owned bus tour company with 2 remote workers in Ontario. Would we be allowed to get this subsidy to hire a student?
Hey, Kristen, that sounds awesome, but I'm sorry in this case, because it is you would be an American, you would be a company based in the US. The Canadian federal government wouldn't approve you as an employer. If your company was legally based in Canada, that might be a different story, but I'm sorry to say, based on my awareness of the eligibility criteria, employers have to be a legally registered business in Canada. Sorry, but don't be discouraged, because what you're doing is really important and we need it.
Yeah, that's a good question though, Kirsten, definitely. And Joanne says, hi team, great program expansion. Can educational institutions create hospitality and tourism student jobs as well and apply? For example, cafe servers?
Thank you for the feedback. As of right now, post-secondary institutions themselves cannot be employers. During the first year of the program that we had, they were eligible just because there weren't enough essentially active work integrated learning and safe experiences in the tourism industry during the pandemic. But as of the current year, which is April 1st and moving forward, post-secondary institutions themselves are not eligible for funding. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks so much. And although we're running over time a little bit, there's only 3 questions submitted here that we haven't gotten to yet, so we should have time to get to these.
Let's do it.
Here's one that's more on the technical side. Jim says, I realized I already had a sign-in from a previous presentation from Tourism HR Canada. When I log in, it doesn't show the Propel program.
Yeah, so great question. When you log in, it really doesn't, other than the original landing page that we have up on the screen here, it doesn't really do a very good job of telling you you're in a Propel program. It's the process of applying for the wage subsidy. When you actually apply for the wage subsidy, the question says something like, which organization would you like to apply for the wage subsidy for? When you click on that menu, you'll see Propel and Tourism HR Canada. That's it right there. The reason is, if you are a tourism industry employer and you apply for a wage subsidy from another sector, so there are many sectors who are approved for this. You know, there's one, the other THRC is Trucking HR Canada. They have wage subsidy. So let's say you're a hospitality tourism industry employer and you've applied for a wage subsidy and you click Trucking HR Canada, their eligibility isn't going to allow you to receive that funding. So there will be an opportunity for you to click Tourism HR Canada as the funding source and Propel through that process. But because the entire system is built by Magnet and Outcome Campus Connect, it is quite generic once you get in there.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Sorry, it's Rachel here. Great answer, Joe. Can I just jump in very quickly to add some more context? I think that might help, Jim. If you are just a little confused about which program you're currently under, because as Joe mentioned, there's like these other programs that offer this subsidy, I would just check the top corner or like the dashboard of your account. It usually has a Tourism HR or Propel logo that'll help you confirm, sort of just to confirm that you're on the right program. But if not, please do reach out to us at propel@tourismhr.ca, because we'll be happy to go step by step with you just to confirm or help you redirect if you need it.
Thank you, Rachel. Great. And Carly's asking, is the employer required to submit personal information about the student as part of the subsidy application?
Short answer is yes. I'm actually going to ask Rachel to answer that question a little bit.
Yeah, sure. The main information we would ask for, or the form asked for online, is their contact information, maybe what year of study they are in their school, as well as just maybe the address of the placement. That's usually, it's pretty limited though. There's not too much personal information.
Wonderful. And let's see here. So we have one more question that was submitted here through the platform, and then I have one more that was direct message to me. So Alicia's asking, I noticed that one of the job types is volunteer that you can advertise. How does that work with allocating the funding? Would the business absorb it?
So volunteer technically is a type of work integrated learning. But if they are volunteering and you are paying them, then they really aren't volunteering. So that's a bit of a technical detail there. Some academic programs have a component that require you to volunteer a certain number of hours before you graduate. So that means that it's a component of work integrated learning. But if it's volunteer and it's unpaid, then you can't access wage subsidy. And if it's volunteered and you're paying, then it really isn't volunteering in the truest sense, at which point you should post it as a field placement or an internship or something, pay the student, and then get access to that wage subsidy.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you, Joe. And the very last one we have submitted here, this is great. We get to answer everybody's questions today, which is fantastic. Amanda is asking, if employment is terminated prior to the end of the contract, prior to the end of the employment contract, are the previously paid wages still eligible for the subsidy?
Yes. So yes, it is a wage subsidy, which essentially means you are paying the student, and then Tourism HR Canada is reimbursing you for the subsidy component of those wages. So yes, if they leave, then you are still eligible for the wage subsidies for the time that they were there.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much.
Dan, I think I have a question from Amy. It's a short, easy answer. I don't know if we got that one, but it says, do you know if travel agencies would qualify under the tourism category? 100% yes.
Oh, thanks, Joe. I hadn't seen that one. That's great. Thank you. And again, to anyone that might want to hear these answers again, I'll be sending the entire recording to everybody tomorrow afternoon. So probably around lunchtime tomorrow, March 24th. So if you'd like to watch the presentation again or the Q&A session again, it'll all be available in the form of a single YouTube video. So that pretty much wraps things up. From all of us here at Baxter Media, I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar. If you happen to miss part of the webinar today or sign in late, again, the recording will be sent to everybody tomorrow afternoon, and it'll also be available on the Baxter Media YouTube channel. So if you go on YouTube and search for Baxter Media, look for the blue and black logo against the white background. And I'd like to give a huge thank you to Joe Baker and Rachel George. It was so great having you here virtually with us today.
Thanks for having us, Dan.
Thank you very much.
And thanks, everybody. We wish you a really successful, prosperous summer season. We are hugely passionate, as you can tell, about the tourism and hospitality industry across this country. And so we wish you nothing but success. Hope that you can access some great wage subsidies, hire some students on some really meaningful work integrated learning opportunities, and help develop your early talent so that we can get back to that beautiful, robust tourism and hospitality industry that this country has had for so many years.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Rachel. And take care, everyone.